morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today at the Africa Media Festival 4th edition. And for South Sudan, this edition is special to us because for the first time since AMF started, we are now being represented by two of our colleagues plus myself, the National Editors Forum with Joel Jani, who also share the same story that I'll be presenting on today, and then a representative from the civil society, Nelson Kwaje. And of course, journalists for human rights, which I also present. We have our colleagues around. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak about courage beyond fear. And actually, this theme, I didn't just draft it from somewhere. It's from an experience that, do you know that take courage, you tell a colleague every day because you know they are going through hard time? Yes, that is where I got it from. It looks like a simple word, but it keeps someone going. I humbly invite you now to join me to share my 15-year experience practicing journalism in South Sudan, starting during the pre-independence period when Sudan was still one country in 2010, up to date. So there will be pre-independence period, during independence, and after independence. I hope I won't confuse you in the process. But before I dive deeper, I would like to ask something. Have you ever been in a situation whereby somebody looks at you, or the government look at you, and they fear you more than thousands of men who are holding guns and fighting against the government? That is my experience. That is how our government used to look at us as journalists. It never stopped during the time of the then president of the Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, but it continued up to date. So I started my journalism at that time. And by the way, journalism was not treated as a profession. It was treated as an act of defiance against the government. Journalists were seen as the worst enemies of the state. And so when you practice journalism, you have to hide yourself. You can't let everybody know that you are a journalist. Yes, they may see you in the screen, they may see the bylines in the newspapers or hear your voice in the radio, but that is not something to brag with in the community. Because, do you know why? Journalists were being monitored everywhere. We had the spy agents. And what actually shocked me more is journalists being called spies while we are being spied on. You know, you will not know the reports of the spies because it's undercover, but you would at least read or view or watch or listen to the reports that the journalists are collecting every day. But we were termed as like criminals against the government. And that is where I got that word. Speaking truth to power was viewed as the real crime against the government. You didn't have to go to court to be proven guilty. You were already guilty by choosing a career, a journalism career, which was characterized by intimidation, embedding of national security officers inside the media houses, monitoring every single report that we were writing every day, and then making a decision. We had final editors. Our own editors were not the final editors. The national security officers were the final editors to remove what was critical of the government, and they still do it to date. So then I moved to the next. Was there a moment of hope? Yes, there was. because as South Sudanese, by then we had an assumption that the problem was the Sudanese government in Khartoum. And we thought that we have to keep hope alive because when South Sudan becomes independent, all this suffering shall be erased. And then a beautiful country where three major things which we all believed in, that was freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and association, which were banned in Khartoum, and media freedom, which was problematic. We thought these were the three gifts that the new country will come with. But no, we were faced with the darkest time of our life or the career. I used to work for a newspaper called The Citizen, which immediately after the independence, we moved from Khartoum to Juba. So we were handling two issues: establishing the media in South Sudan, because now we had to move out of Sudan and come back to our country. And then two, a government that never believed that what we used to write during the Khartoum regime can be written again in Juba. So our newspaper actually was marked first as an enemy, not because of the stories we were writing, but because of the slogan we chose. The slogan was fighting corruption and dictatorship every day. And those were the major issues. So you don't need to buy the newspaper because of the new articles, but the moment the spy agents goes to the market and still see that slogan on the newspaper, they come and ask, how comes that you have not removed that slogan? So anytime I go to the field, and actually I thought that was not intimidation, I thought that was not an harassment, when they could tell me during the press conferences if there was a reporter from The Citizen among the journalists. And I would raise my hand and they would say, please go back and tell your boss to change the slogan. Otherwise, we will deal with you. And indeed, they dealt with us. The darkest moment in my career started in December 2012, when one of our best brain columnists was killed. He received several warnings that he should stop writing. The security agencies spoke to his family to give the warning officially, but he said no. If the government is complaining about my writings, it means that I'm speaking truth to power. And so shall I continue. Unfortunately, because of those critical articles which he wrote, and by the way, I'm proud of him because today, what he was predicting back in the days is now being seen happening on the ground. Kind of told the government to stop doing some things, and if they stop, we'll go back to war. And indeed, South Sudan went back to war in 2013. That didn't stop only with Isaiah Abram, a journalist who worked with me, whom I actually onboarded and mentored, was killed in 2015. Peter Moy. So the question was not, can you stay the cause or are you quitting? No, there was nothing like that anymore because you have to quit. My family was convincing me to leave. They told me, no, it's too dangerous to be there anymore. So there was nothing like to debate about whether you stay the course or not. And by the way, after the incidences of killing in 2012, the issue of reimagining the media freedom was not something that could wait for another day to discuss. Every editorial meeting had discussions around what can we do to improve the environment we work in. And indeed, we did something. The journalists started strengthening the media advocacy groups, the Union of Journalists, the Association for Media Development in South Sudan. By that time, we didn't have the editors forum yet. But it was hard to convene meetings because you need permission. To convene a meeting of 5 people, you need permission to do that. And then at home, you are being followed, so your home is no longer safe even for you. We started receiving name callings, Name callings, rebels. And we had real rebels in the bushes, But then the journalists were like the rebels within for the government. Because you try to balance the story by telling the other side of those who are fighting against the government. But they start naming you rebels. These are people, remember, you fought for one mission. That is a South Sudan where everybody have the rights, all the rights that are enshrined in the Constitution. So fear became part of our daily lives. It lived in us, Enemies of peace, because you have written an article that you have to stop war, but they tell you that you are an enemy of peace. When we get support from the donor community because there was no any other source of funding, these issues of advertisement from private sector, government, doesn't exist. So when you are supported by the donors, they start calling you agents of change, that the money you are getting from the donor is to preach that. And all that happened. So the question is, and this takes me to the next, why continue then? It reached to a moment where we realized confrontation was not a solution to our problems, and quitting was not a solution either. So what we did was to say that, look, we don't need to be too stubborn against the government. This is a conviction that we have chosen, and what we are going to do is also to devise strategies to survive. So we started advocating for the enactment of the media laws with the hope that the media laws will actually help us. So indeed, the media laws were enacted and into laws by December 2013. And then the war continued through 2016. So the institutions that were responsible for the implementation of the media laws were not established. And it was that time that our newspaper was actually seen as a media house that cannot continue to operate in that environment. So on 21st September 2015, the Citizen newspaper was officially shut down. Mainly not because of those other articles that were written, but the slogan that they continued to say was the real problem. Journalists were told you can't be talking about corruption. You can't be talking about dictatorship. Leave that to others. But still, I wanted to continue with the fight, and I actually ensured that when our editor-in-chief decided to quit, I started a new newspaper under the Citizen, which was called This Day newspaper. But because of the economic hardship, This Day did not survive for long. And then again, at that point, I was now receiving threats, and I felt it was too heavy to continue. So I said, I don't need to quit, but I need to strategize on what to do next. So this time round, I decided to go back to the church, that is to work with the Catholic Radio Network, and see whether the gospel truth will be better than speaking the truth in a newspaper. But they kept reminding me that please stick to the gospel. Leave injustices to others. Leave the issues of human rights to others. And I would always remind them about the social teachings in the church, that there could be no any other better media house to talk about the injustices and the human rights issues apart from the church itself. So we were hard on that. And lucky enough, compared to the Citizen, the radio stations were located inside the church compound. So raiding the radio stations was a bit harder than raiding a newspaper, which was just outside in a commercial area. So that is what actually kept me to stay. Unfortunately, one of the radios also interviewed one of the opposition leaders, and the radio was shut down. You see, darkness followed, so it's not like you are running away from problems. Instead, problems are increasing. So we fought hard. The radio came back, but not with the same strategies. More of gospel, and then the time, like prime time, more of gospel, so that you kind of hide what you are doing. And then those hours you think the security people might be asleep, you put the hard talk about the real issues. So then that's how I moved. And this was the time, actually, we did something under my role as JHR. Since we already had the media laws, we actually advocated for the implementation of the media laws. And there was one beautiful article in the media laws which says that all the media cases will be handled by the media authority. Media authority is like the media council in most of the countries. So we saw that as an opportunity to survive. And the media authority was established. So I'll quickly bring this. So we changed our strategy. We said holding the bull by the horns is too dangerous, because you can't run. You don't have an option to run anywhere. But then if you hold by the tail, you have a time to talk and call for dialogue. So that is exactly what we did. We decided to hold the bull by the tails. And we started calling for more dialogues, calling for implementation of the media laws. So the media laws implementation started, and some of the partners who believed in the media freedom came in. Journalists for Human Rights supported the establishment of the media authority. And the beauty was that most of the cases were now being handled by the media authority and not the national security. My two worst experiences with the media authority, with the national security, was that, by the way, being summoned was worse than when you disappear. Like when somebody picked you up, your story is finished. But when you are summoned, what they will do is to call you late in the night so that you can have sleepless night. And I remember two of my colleagues had blood pressure overnight before they could go, because you don't know what they will tell you. And if they threaten you from there, it's not a question of staying anymore. You will make a decision of quitting, because whatever they will tell you is the last warning, and it's about choosing your life over the career. And that was a militarized environment that nobody would want to visit. So when media authority came, and it's an environment where you meet people who are your colleagues. I also had one of my colleagues working there. It was a bit better, because although they would talk to you and say, stop doing A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z, you feel that you have an opportunity to continue. So since the establishment of the media authority, three major things started happening. That is organizing dialogues with the security sector. So we come and tell them, here are the issues you have been doing to us. Here are the issues you feel we don't do well. What should we do? And suggestions were done, including organizing working groups that can actually promote press freedom and freedom of expression. JHR also helped in terms of organizing security sector training on media literacy, because the reality was most of the people who are dealing with the media didn't know even the role of the media. So this is where we are today. We are doing more dialogues. And again, most of the commercial media houses, unfortunately, didn't come back to life. We are relying on community media. Because there, even if you cover sensitive stories, there is a community to back you up compared to commercial. So if you go to South Sudan now, you'll find most of the media houses there are community media houses. So finally, before I move on about the time, is then from this darkest moment, what do we need? What do we need? Our purpose is strengthening emergency response mechanisms. I'm saying this because most of our colleagues actually have been seeking safety in Kenya. And some of them are actually deported back to the country, or they are again handed over to the government.
1 minute.
And when that happened, you don't find them alive anymore. So we need to strengthen the emergency response mechanisms in a way that you don't wait until the last minute that somebody is running for their life and that's when you want to rescue them. I would say human rights defenders matters too, because in the middle of my career, I was also advocating for the rights of the journalist. I got traumatized, a lot happened to me, but then the concern was always about the journalists, but then the human rights defenders find themselves alone most of the time. Provision of legal aid because in a country like ours, interpretation of the law is based on the interest of the person. And most of the articles in the laws that are used against the journalist is incitement, violence, and hate speech, because there is never a clear definition. So a moment that I have written an article about corruption, that government official will say, you are inciting the public against me, and it is in the laws. So we need to have lawyers who understand the media laws to be there for the journalist. Counseling and psychosocial support in the cases of mental wellness is very important. Especially for us, we don't need to wait until someone breaks down. It is something that can be embedded in the training materials. And finally, establishing regional or African-led rest and refuge programs so that somebody like Joel, who is leading the National Editors Forum, when he realized he has done much and is exhausted, he can find a place to rest, not to run when things are worse. So when reimagining media freedom, we actually need to know where we came from. And it is not something that we should do after incidences happen. It is something that we need to be thinking on a daily basis, because the people who actually deal with the journalists or who are against the journalists is strategized every day. So we don't have time to waste, but we should be on top of things the same way the security who monitors our work also does. Thank you very much for listening.
No problem.